Paris, January the 21st, year 1793. A bitter chill claws at the skin, and a heavy fog lingers over the city like a shroud. At the Place de la Révolution, the proud Place Louis le Grand cobblestones groan beneath the weight of 20,000 silent witnesses. The air tastes of iron and smoke. In the center looms a wooden structure, grim and mechanical. The guillotine what revolutionaries now dub the national razor, as if decapitation were simply a matter of grooming. At precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, a creaking carriage emerges onto the square, flanked by rows of National Guards. The drums pound like war thunder, relentless and deafening. The door swings open, and from within steps a man of 38, broad of build, but worn thin by months of captivity and betrayal. He no longer wears velvet or gold, only a plain white shirt. His hair is clipped. His title is gone. The crowd does not shout, "Your Majesty." They call him Louis Capet. He was once Louis XVI, King of France and Navarre. Today, he is merely another prisoner of the revolution. As he walks toward the scaffold, the crowd breathes in unified silence. The executioners move to bind his hands. He stiffens. "What is the purpose of this?" he asks, his voice still bearing the dignity of kings. Told it is procedure, Louis initially refuses. "Do what you are commanded," he says coldly, "but you shall not bind me." His confessor, the Irish-born Abbé Edgeworth, whispers words of counsel. Louis yields. "Let God's will be done," he says quietly. His wrists are tied. He mounts the steps with the composure of a man ascending a throne. The drummers continue without pause, but Louis raises his hand, a single commanding gesture. Miraculously, the drumming ceases. His voice cuts through the wintry air. "I die innocent. I forgive my enemies. I pray my blood may never fall upon France." A murmur ripples through the crowd, an audible crack in the revolutionary fervor. Unfortunately for the king, this is the part where you pause and subscribe. Why? Because like Louis, you never know when you'll lose your head. And you don't want to miss the next episode in case you're next on history's chopping block. Suddenly, the drums resume, pounding louder than before, drowning out any further final words. Louis is placed on the wooden plank, his neck fitted into the lunette. A brief silence, then a metallic clack. The blade drops. The head that once wore the Bourbon crown now lies in a basket, severed from its history. Charles-Henri Sanson, the royal executioner, holds it aloft by the hair. Blood drips in steady rhythm down his arm. A few in the crowd shout, "Vive la République!" Others cheer, whistle, some weep. A handful of Jacobin fanatics rush to soak their handkerchiefs in royal blood as if it were holy relic. There is even singing. With that blade's descent, the Ancien Regime draws its final breath. But how did Louis, born to rule one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe, become a fallen monarch, publicly executed like a common criminal? To answer that, we must return decades to the ornate halls of Versailles. Louis Auguste de France was born on August the 23rd, year 1754, at the palace of Versailles, a gilded prison where every moment of his life was observed, judged, and choreographed. As the grandson of Louis XV, he was not expected to inherit the crown. His elder brother, the Duke of Burgundy, stood before him in the line of succession, and his father, the Dauphin Louis Ferdinand, was groomed to rule. But fate has a strange fondness for reshuffling the royal deck. In 1765, Louis Ferdinand succumbed to tuberculosis, and just a few years later, the elder brother died young. Suddenly, the spare became the heir. The shy, awkward young prince was thrust into the blinding spotlight of destiny. Unfortunately, he was no natural king. While others at court performed their roles with calculated poise or flamboyant flair, Louis Auguste loathed courtly drama. He was a deeply private boy with little appetite for public posturing. Instead of scheming in corridors or waltzing at balls, he buried himself in books and blueprints. He took genuine pleasure in mechanical tasks, tinkering with timepieces, forging keys, repairing locks. Beneath the powdered wig was the mind of a locksmith, not a sovereign. He was, quite literally, a king who could pick his own locks, an ironic talent, considering his eventual imprisonment. In May of 1770, barely 15 years old, Louis Auguste was married off to the Austrian Archduchess Marie Antoinette. She was just 14. The match was not a matter of love, but diplomacy. The Bourbons of France and the Habsburgs of Austria seeking to patch centuries of bloodshed with a royal marriage. The idea was clever in theory. In practice, it paired a quiet, bookish boy with a vivacious, spirited girl raised in the glittering court of Vienna. Louis was hesitant and earnest. Marie was theatrical, impulsive, and intoxicated by the French fashion scene. Versailles was a stage, and she, from the moment she arrived, wanted the starring role. Their wedding night became an enduring joke throughout Europe. The union famously was not consummated for 7 long years. Gossip swirled. Was Louis impotent? Was he uninterested? Did he even understand what was expected of him? Whispers echoed through the corridors of Versailles and rippled across the continent's salons and cafes. It wasn't until minor surgery, reportedly for a condition called phimosis, that matters were resolved and Marie Antoinette gave birth. But by then, the damage to their reputation was done. The Queen was already mocked as Madame Deficit, and her husband painted as a weak, indecisive boy masquerading as king. When Louis XV died of smallpox in May of 1774, the 20-year-old Louis Auguste ascended the throne as Louis XVI. His coronation took place in Reims Cathedral, steeped in medieval grandeur. But even this sacred ritual was not without incident. As legend tells it, the heavy crown of Charlemagne slipped during the ceremony, tumbling momentarily off his head before being replaced. For superstitious observers, it was a terrible omen. For historians, it now reads as a bitter metaphor. Like Louis, you never know when you'll lose your head, so subscribe now. What Louis inherited was not a kingdom, but a collapsing edifice. The treasury was in ruins, bled dry by the extravagant wars of his predecessors, chiefly the disastrous 7 Years' War. To make matters worse, Louis chose to support the American colonies in their rebellion against Britain, a geopolitical move that inspired revolutionaries but devastated the French economy. The Enlightenment was in full swing, and revolutionary ideals of liberty and equality were spreading like wildfire through the educated classes. Yet the structure of France remained profoundly medieval. The privileged estates, the clergy, and the nobility contributed next to nothing to the national treasury. They were exempt from most taxes, insulated from hardship by centuries of tradition and wealth. Meanwhile, the third estate peasants, merchants, laborers, and lawyers carried the burden of the nation on their backs. They paid taxes on everything: salt, flour, bread, wine, even the right to use a communal oven, and in return they starved. Despite the caricature of a lazy and out-of-touch king, Louis genuinely tried to fix things. "I wish to be loved," he wrote in his journal. He appointed reformers like Turgot and Jacques Necker, abolished torture and serfdom in royal lands, and tried to tax the privileged classes. But his indecisiveness proved fatal. He dismissed Turgot under pressure from the nobility. Necker too was dismissed, then recalled, then dismissed again. The royal court remained extravagant. Marie Antoinette was nicknamed Madame Deficit. Their expensive tastes made her the face of aristocratic excess, and pamphleteers painted her as a foreign manipulator bent on ruining France. Meanwhile, deep structural issues went unaddressed. The rural poor faced hunger as bread prices rose due to harvest failures and grain hoarding. In Paris, growing unemployment and inflation pushed thousands into destitution. Popular anger began to boil. In desperation, Louis summoned the Estates General in May of 1789, a body that had not met since 1614. He hoped they might approve new taxes, but what followed was a political earthquake. The Third Estate, representing commoners, broke away and declared itself the National Assembly. They vowed to write a constitution. It was the birth of modern democracy in France. Louis, reluctant, recognized the assembly, but in private, he planned its downfall. Troops were ordered to surround Paris. In retaliation, the Bastille was stormed on July 14th. The prison itself held few inmates, but its fall symbolized the people's defiance of tyranny. The revolutionary tide swept forward. The Declaration of the Rights of Man was passed. Feudal privileges were abolished. In October, thousands of women driven by hunger marched to Versailles and brought the royal family to Paris, where they lived under surveillance. The king's inaction and duplicity alienated both sides. Radicals saw him as a traitor. Moderates saw him as weak. In June of 1791, his secret flight toward Austria's flight to Varennes ended in disaster. He was arrested, returned in shame, and placed under tighter control. Revolutionary newspapers portrayed him as a coward in disguise, fleeing while his people starved. Even those who had once supported a constitutional monarchy began to doubt whether any king could truly serve liberty. Nevertheless, in September of 1791, a new constitution was adopted. Louis agreed to rule under it as King of the French, but his heart was never in it. Secret correspondence revealed he was conspiring with Austria and Prussia to crush the revolution. When war erupted in April of 1792, the monarchy stood accused of betrayal. In August, the palace was stormed. The Swiss guards were massacred. Louis and his family were taken to the Temple prison, an old medieval fortress. The monarchy was abolished. Louis's trial in December was both dramatic and chilling. He was allowed to speak in his defense and answered calmly, even eloquently. But the evidence against him, his own words and letters, condemned him. On January the 17th, the convention voted death by guillotine. 4 days later, the sentence was carried out. On the night before his execution, January the 20th, year 1793, Louis spent several agonizing hours with his family inside the stone-cold Temple prison. It was a meeting soaked in sorrow and dread. Their final farewell was not that of royalty, but of a broken family bracing for the unimaginable. Marie Antoinette, once the glittering Austrian woman of Versailles, wept in quiet despair. Her powdered grandeur had long since faded, replaced by a hollow, grief-stricken face. The king embraced his children tightly. His young son, Louis XVI, the uncrowned heir, barely 8 years old, refused to let go of his father. He clung to his waistcoat, sobbing, begging him not to leave. His daughter, Marie-Thérèse, remembered it all with chilling clarity in later years. She would write, with heartbreak etched between every line, that she had never seen her father cry until that moment. And yet, even as his world crumbled, Louis tried to soothe them, telling his children to forgive those who hurt them and to be brave in the days ahead. That same night, Louis received his final confession from the Irish priest, Abbé Edgeworth de Firmont. With quiet composure, he spoke of God, of fate, and of forgiveness. He asked for no vengeance. Instead, he wrote a will in which he forgave his enemies from the depths of his soul. He requested a simple burial, no pageantry, no procession, only that his wedding ring be returned to his beloved wife, and that he be allowed a proper Christian funeral. These requests, made in humility and love, were all denied. At dawn, the drums began to roll. At precisely 10 in the morning, the former King of France was led to the guillotine in the Place de la Révolution. He mounted the scaffold with a steady gait, pausing only to declare his innocence and forgive the people. But the executioner quickly silenced him, and within seconds, the blade fell. His head was held aloft, and the crowd, though vast, was eerily divided. Some jeered, some wept, many stood in stunned silence. The death of Louis XVI sent shockwaves through the courts of Europe. Monarchs who had once scoffed at France's internal squabbles now shuddered. If the French people could behead their king, what was to stop their own subjects from doing the same? Alliances began to form. Wars loomed. Inside France, the revolution did not calm. It convulsed. The king's execution did not mark peace, but blood. In his place came chaos. The Reign of Terror soon unfolded, with Robespierre and the Jacobins turning on enemies both real and imagined. Nobles and clergy were dragged from their homes. Even simple citizens suspected of harboring monarchist thoughts or failing to display sufficient revolutionary zeal were guillotined in public squares. Heads fell by the hundreds, then thousands. The revolution devoured its children. Even Robespierre, architect of the Terror, was executed by the same machine he had so proudly praised. The blade that ended monarchy became the grim equalizer of all. Louis's execution was not merely the death of a king, it was the death of a centuries-old idea. The divine right of kings, once claimed to be eternal and God-ordained, was split in two, like his neck beneath the guillotine. In its place rose a terrifying, beautiful question. Can men govern themselves, or will they simply find new tyrants to replace the old? 2 centuries on, historians still argue over the man and his meaning. Some call Louis a hapless dullard, a well-fed fool who fiddled with keys while his country burned. Others see a gentle man, earnest, reform-minded, but hopelessly ill-equipped for the avalanche that buried him. Was he a traitor who plotted with enemies of the revolution, or merely a frightened father doing what he thought would keep his family safe? One thing is certain. Louis XVI did not fail because he was wicked. He failed because he was outdated. He tried to govern as a king in a world that no longer wanted kings. The Enlightenment had shattered the illusions of sacred rule. The people no longer bowed automatically, they asked questions. And so, the guillotine came down not just on a monarch, but on monarchy itself. Survived this far? Subscribe, history repeats, and the next revolution's coming.